I believe this is on, so
So don't say silly things.
you can say whatever you want.
We'll give it a couple more minutes, but we won't make much more than that. My remarks are pretty short, and then John has his. Does this have something to do? No. What are you doing?
I'll leave that in there.
All of them there. 3:15. If you would like to sit, I will call you up.
Okay.
You seem like a bit of an, Yeah, I think we should get going. It's kind of weird having a mic. It's odd having a mic in a room this size. Oh, for the streaming. And it's on. Yeah. Okay, folks, if you want to just get settled, we'll get started in just a few seconds. Wow, that was impressive. All right. All right, then we'll get going here. So first of all, I want to welcome you all to this presentation of the Distinguished Instructor Award. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nancy Lukai, and I'm the Deputy Provost. And it's one of the most pleasant things that I get to do is to participate in this sort of an event. I would like to begin by extending a warm welcome to all previous recipients of the Distinguished Instructor Award, and I'm sure we have at least one in the room, and there's probably more than that. So if you wouldn't, no, well, Ulf's just a little bit closer. I could say it was my eyesight. So please, any former recipients of the Distinguished Instructor Award, if you would please stand so we could recognize you. Oh, you really are all in a clump. Thank you very much. And also, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of our current recipients of the Contribution to Teaching Awards. So I know that a couple of our recipients from this past year, in fact, 3 of the 5 are from the Orillia campus, and they include Ruth Beattie, Michael Hoshman, and Tim Kaiser. But from the Thunder Bay campus, we have Connie Russell and Angela Van Barneveld. And I'm not sure if either Connie or Angela were able to join us today. No? Right. So a few words about the Distinguished Instructor Award. The Distinguished Instructor Award is Lakehead University's most prestigious teaching award. It recognizes a significant contribution to teaching excellence and educational innovation and leadership at Lakehead over a number of years. We can award up to 1 award per year, but we don't always. And the recipient of the Distinguished Instructor Award has been recognized at Senate and will now be honored at this reception. It is now my pleasure to call upon Dr. John O'Mara, Dean of the Faculty of Education, to introduce our Distinguished Instructor Award recipient. John?
Thanks very much, Nancy. Dr. Melville exemplifies truly the criteria used to define this award since arriving at Lakehead University in 2005. His career has included excellence in teaching, in research about teaching, and in educational leadership. Dr. Melville has been recognized for excellence in teaching many times within and without the university. including nominations for awards in Australia and North America. He is regularly called upon to provide peer review for colleagues wishing to improve their own teaching. He has an extensive portfolio of peer-reviewed papers and has published 2 books, and I know that there are more on the way. He's extremely busy. His contributions to program development within the Faculty of Education and elsewhere in the university are impressive and significant. He has provided extensive service to the Faculty of Education, the university, and to his profession through a wide range of administrative roles. He has been active in Senate committees and provided leadership in professional associations. And I might also add that for a number of years he has been the assistant dean within the Faculty of Education. And on a personal note, I'm truly grateful for Wayne's service over the past number of years. He's really been a difference maker within our faculty, and that is noteworthy on top of all of the many other things that he does for us. So without any further delay, I invite Wayne to come up and speak to you.
Thank you, John. So is that all right up the back there? Okay, so we're actually going a low-tech solution because we tried to put my computer via wireless up there and it didn't work, so I've got to operate 2 screens here. Okay, so just bear with me. Just turning to what John said, the good thing about doing lots of things around the university is that you're guaranteed to get a few of them right, so just keep that in mind. So let's make a start. Again, welcome to everyone coming for this presentation. I'd like to thank the Senate Teaching and Learning Committee, Karen Keeler and all her crew for actually organising and putting today together. And also congratulations on the opening of the Teaching Commons, a culmination of 10 or 12 years of work, so well done. I actually have a cold at the moment, so just you have to live with that. That's why I'm standing at a distance. So, I'm also on sabbaticals, so theoretically I'm not here. Okay, so today's talk is about becoming an instructor. And the reason it's becoming an instructor is because this is actually a journey of constant improvement. And so Karen actually talked about going on a journey this morning. And so this actually follows on the same thing. We did not collaborate on this at all. It's a journey without an endpoint, and the reason there is no actual endpoint is because the journey is always changing. Students change, we change as people and as instructors, knowledge changes, and of course the expectations of instructors also change. But one thread which holds this all together, at least from my perspective, is that students need to be at the heart of everything that we do. And if we hold that thought, that will be weaved through the entire presentation. So a good teaching strategy is to present people with an overview of where we're actually going today. And so I've actually split it up into 3 parts. Maybe it's my Presbyterian background where everything is always in 3 parts. So the qualities of an instructor, and you already know the answers to that one, so we're going to call on your assistance. Change and uncertainty, because change is very difficult and dealing with uncertainty is a big part of becoming an instructor, and then taking action, because thinking about things is good, putting things into practice is even better. The reason it's good always to provide an overview is one, you let people know where they're going. If people know where they're going, they tend to follow along a lot more readily than if they've got no idea where the instructor is heading. Second, you can then start to build in the importance of why we're actually doing this. Then you can also point out the skills, the attitudes and the knowledge which people actually need to actually do what it is you're asking of them. And then finally, what does success look like? Because if people know what success looks like, then they've got something to aim at. So this is very much a personal journey because there's experience. There's also theory and practice. And again, this was said this morning. You cannot have theory divorced from practice. Okay, one has to inform the other and vice versa. That said, I'm getting good at these two screen caper. Roland Barthes, who was a school administrator and a school principal back in the early 90s, wrote this sentence in one of the books that he wrote: "When teachers stop growing, so do their students." And that for me is a crucial part of what it is to become an instructor. Now, this is where you get involved. Think of the worst class or course you've ever been in as a student, not an instructor, we'll go there later, as a student. Now, have a think about the instructor in that particular course or lesson. If they didn't know their material, if they're not interested in it, if they're not interested in you as a person, if they clearly wanted to be somewhere else, they were hanging out for retirement or whatever. How did you feel as a person at that time, or as a student at that time? Take about 37 seconds to think about it. Oh, one person's rushing in. Good teaching strategy, don't always go with the first answer. Otherwise it'll be Monica the whole time. It's called wait time. A lot of instructors don't like it. Okay. Lost.
Valueless.
Valueless. Good one. Monica?
Cheated.
Cheated.
Frustrated.
Frustrated.
Bored.
Bored.
Irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Are any of those positives?
It was a free course. I felt a little stupid, but I got what I paid for.
Good answer. Barth was correct. If you have an instructor who is not a learner, then they're not actually doing their job. I'd actually go so far as to say they're a hypocrite, because all good instructors are also very good at learning. So if an instructor is not learning, then as I said, they're not doing their job, but it also means that we have to challenge two particular canards. And the first one, I knew my friends from the English department would be here. So George Bernard Shaw, from Man and Superman, first published in 1903, he who can does, and he who understands teaches. Now, this second part is actually not what Bernard Shaw wrote, okay? This actually comes from, oh, I've got to change screens again here, give me a minute. It's actually from Schulman's work in the mid-80s. That's the 1980s, not the 1880s. Basically, Schulman looked at what teachers need to know in order to do their job properly. And he came to the conclusion, oh, gone too far, that you cannot teach unless you know, one, the material. Now, it wasn't just the substantive knowledge. That's the main theories, the main concepts, the main ideas which underpin your subject. He also said a good instructor needs to understand the syntactic knowledge. How is knowledge developed within your subject area? Okay, so you know, how are theories developed? How are laws developed? Fermi's theorem in mathematics, how did that come about? So how does knowledge develop? So he said you actually need to teach people how knowledge develops if they're going to learn about your discipline. He also said that you need to know how people learn, because not everyone learns the same way that each of us learns. And so if you're going to be an effective instructor, then you have to understand how people, this part of the room learn, people over there, each individual. The second one is good teachers are born, not made. So we're going to see if this works. Hopefully it will. It's thinking about it. I apologise for the sound. That was one thing we didn't actually figure out when we actually put this together. So, but if you want to have a look at it, just for as Bueller's economics teacher, go for it. There was a report in the failing New York Times which said that was actually shown to a certain US president to try and explain why winning a trade war with China would not be easy. But it may be fake news. So again, I apologise for the technical glitch, but you get the idea. So, good teachers are born? No. Some may be, but we can also educate ourselves, become better instructors. Which brings us to our first section. So the qualities. What are the qualities that you would look for in a good instructor? So you've got about 87 seconds. Turn to the people beside you, behind you, whatever. Have a chat with them. I want some words which you would use. So go to it.
Passion.
Passion.
Engaging.
Flexibility. Organization.
Yep.
Patient.
Patient and knowledgeable.
Humble.
Is that a yes or no?
It is now. Nice penmanship. Sense of humor.
Make sure you put these in the criteria for next year's.
What else? Creativity.
Something else?
Enthusiastic.
Well, that was two. sitting in classes, we know, oh, it's got loud all of a sudden. We know all these things. We know all these things about good instructors. Now, notice we didn't turn anything down either. So another tip for you, if you're getting your students' opinions on things, put them up, okay? Nice penmanship, okay? We know it's not a brilliant answer, but it's up there. So if we have all these words, then we actually need some sort of way of classifying them. And so what we're going to do is use Aristotle, okay? This is Raphael's fresco of the School of Athens, 1509, as a representation of knowledge. It's titled philosophy, but as a representation of knowledge, it's actually not that good because they're all white guys. They've all got hipster beards and they're all got the same dress sense. But Aristotle's this one here. Raphael actually put himself down here. So he painted himself sort of as a way to prove that he had actually done it. So Aristotle is very important because he wrote a lot about teaching. He wrote about what the good life is, eudaimonia. And also, if you're doing graduate studies in education, you mention Aristotle and you can't go too far wrong because he's always good to include. What Aristotle said was that there are three things which an instructor understands. The first is episteme. Now, the translations of this vary. Some people claim it's knowledge of the world in general. Others claim it's knowledge of the particular subject. Others claim that there's a crossover. How does this knowledge of the subject relate to knowledge of the world? Okay, so it does have a range of meanings. If you don't know the subject, you can't instruct in it. Okay. He also said techne, which is the root word for technical, technological, and so on. Knowing how to do something. Now, the problem with techne is that it's often quite tacit. So things which are unobserved actually go into making for techne. Verbal ability, pedagogical skill, ability to convey ideas in a clear and concise manner, the ability to work in teams, the ability to use a range of teaching strategies, enthusiasm and motivation are all important parts of techne. The other part which Aristotle said was this phronesis. Sometimes it translates as practical wisdom. It's about making the right decisions in the right circumstances for the right reasons. And really this is sort of a moral dimension to teaching. And phronesis binds episteme and techne together and points them in the correct direction. If you have a look back at our list over here, if we wanted to, we could actually go through and put each of those into one of these. Okay, nice penmanship, for example, would be techne. So you were right. Passion. Passion would probably go into phronesis, okay, because you need to be committed. It would also fit into techne as well, because you need to motivate students. We have patient, might come into phronesis and techne again, and so on. And so you can actually go through, pick out the things which instructors do and actually use this typology to see how they fit in together. The idea of phronesis is actually quite important because it actually leads onto this statement here, which is actually probably the most important slide for the entire afternoon. If you're an instructor, then you actually have a moral obligation, because every learner is of fundamental importance in every teaching situation. This was Hugh Socket, who is an English philosophy of education teacher, very highly regarded, but he is of the opinion you are not teaching subjects, you're working with people. If you're working with people, then there has to be a moral concern for them. If there is a moral concern, then of course the instructor needs to be constantly working to improve their skills, their instruction, in order to meet the needs of their students. And remember, those needs keep changing, as we're about to see. Which brings us to the second point. Knowledge is not enough. Now, if you remember techne, phronesis, and episteme and leave here, that's great. But they're not actually going to change anything. Just need a glass of water, sorry. Because these things need to be put into practice if they're going to make any difference in your students' lives. Because knowledge needs to be put into practice. To change something requires action. So, for example, I started off teaching 1989 science, some history and some geography. And I used to teach the scientific method, which actually doesn't exist, but don't tell anyone. Craig already knows that. But there are a series of steps, so you make observations, you make up a hypothesis, you come up, you test it, and so on. It doesn't actually exist, but I would teach these are the steps, make sure you put the right names in the right boxes, and then on the test they'd all get that right. So good work, move on. They knew what the steps were, they had no idea how to use them. It actually took me a couple of years to work out these kids actually need to practice making a hypothesis. These kids need practice in making observations. These kids need practice in gathering evidence and then using that to argue for a particular point. These kids need to understand that if your hypothesis isn't supported by the evidence, then that is actually still good science. Knowledge by itself is no good. It needs to be met with practice. So, we also know that change is hard. For a couple of reasons. We need to recognise a need for change. If there is no need to change, why would you change? Okay, so a lot of times people, if they're saying, well, I've been doing this for the last 5, 10 years, it's working well, why would I change it? Okay, they need to be considering what they're actually doing. Second, we need to have credible alternatives. Posner, and Hewson, back in the 1980s, wrote a very influential paper on change. And they said, you might have the best intention to change, but if there is no credible alternative in your particular field, it's unlikely you're going to try anything new, because we tend to be socialised into a particular way of thinking. We need motivation. If you see teaching and learning as a moral activity, that is often enough motivation. The evidence is not really clear one way or the other, but the strongest change is when it's done from an intrinsic motivation. Becoming an instructor requires learning, and some people are better at learning than others. And so one of the issues which places like the Teaching Commons will have to face is that you cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching and learning. It won't work because people learn in different ways at different paces and so on. And the last two again, these are unusual. They're not seen very often, but if we don't address them, then we have a problem. If you're an instructor, you'll see yourself as an instructor of a particular subject or a particular discipline. So I'm a science teacher. Nancy works in forestry and natural resources. That would be her identity. There are particular ways of looking at that subject, at looking at that discipline, and that shapes our identity. To start to change that requires us to question what it is we're actually doing as an instructor. The math chair, the first math chair I worked with, he said, I teach mathematics, there are 2 criteria. The kids can do it or they can't. And he was deadly serious. And the ones who succeeded were the ones that he actually taught. The ones he decided couldn't do it, he sort of left them. Second, it's also constrained by our disciplinary constraints. Now, each discipline has a particular way of looking at the world, and that can actually act to constrain how we go about looking at teaching and learning, especially higher status subjects. Because they've been around for a long time, they create a lot of power and a lot of prestige to them, and there is a good way to teach them. If you go outside what is seen as being good, then that can be seen as a real challenge for you, and if you're in a department, for the department as well. So, let's have a look. Marijke van Tatenhove. March 1989, I'd been teaching for 5 weeks. Mrs. van Tatenhove, bless her cotton socks, came in and she said, Wayne, my daughter and her friends think your class is really boring. Awesome. That's tremendous. You've got a couple of options here. Let's have a look here. There's a 2-second delay on this and it should work. Here we go. So, one is ignore the comment. If you ignore it, it'll go away. Second option, get angry. You've just spent, 3 years getting a science degree. You love your subject. You love your subjects. You've spent another year getting a diploma of education on top of that, so you know how to teach. You're registered as a teacher by the Tasmanian Teachers Registration Board. You know what you're doing. It's your classroom. You're only a parent. What do you know? Option C. Now, of course, the length of this one gives it away. It might be the best option, but ignore that. Think through what has been said and start working on improving as a teacher. Okay? Option D is a good one. Actually, this is the first protocol. Drink beer. It doesn't say the quantity, but you get the idea. The last option, quit. I actually went through A, B, C, and D. Not in that order. D sort of lubricated some of the others as well, but that's a different story. I actually filled out applications to quit because it was so discouraging. You spend all this time training to become a teacher and to be told within 5 weeks you're no good. Now, E's not a good option, okay? Actually, because I taught all 3 of her kids, I actually went back to her a couple of years later and said, thank you very much for telling me I sucked at my job. Because it actually did force me to improve. It was 2 or 3 years before there was real improvement, but that comment always has stood out for me for all the right reasons. Initially, though, it was quite devastating. So if we're going to question practice, this is the work of Lebowski, who was a sociologist, a common sense thinker moving towards being an alert novice. A common sense thinker, this is where I started off as an instructor. Basically, a common sense thinker is of the opinion if something happens, then the way you respond to it is the way you responded to it last time. So you just repeat the same response. It doesn't matter if the context changes. It doesn't matter if there are different people involved. You just do the same. The other thing a common sense thinker will do, if that doesn't work, then they'll go back and teach the way they were taught. They'll respond to it in the way that they were used to being taught themselves. Now, neither of those actually allows the person to grow as an instructor or actually as a person. Okay, so a common sense thinker. If you start questioning your practice, then you become what Lebowski calls an alert novice. An alert novice is always considering their practice. So what works and why does it work? What doesn't work and why doesn't it work? Okay? The description of what works and what doesn't work, that's good, but it's actually asking why it works or why it doesn't work, which is better. Because there are some things which as an instructor you can control. There are some things you cannot control. And so you need to know the difference between those two. The ones you can control, by all means, work on them. The ones you can't control, then as you gain more confidence, more experience, then are there ways you can actually contribute to the wider university community and actually change them? So things like program reviews and so on would be something which initially people don't have much control over, but which they actually can. Which brings us to evolving an identity. Identity involves 3 parts. One is discourse, another is experience, and the other one's emotion. And these 3 all play off each other. So within discourse, there are a range of discourses which we engage in as instructors. There's the disciplinary discourse. What is it about our subject? There are discourses around teaching and learning, and there are discourses at the institutional level. For experience, time is going to pass as an instructor. That's a given. It's what you do with that time which is the important part. And with emotions, because teaching is very much in the affective domain, emotions play a huge part in this, and we forget them at our peril if we're trying to improve what we do. And so We need to have a look at them and also link them back to experience, because emotions and experience are like that. They're very closely bound together. So a very wise vice principal, he called me aside one day and he goes, "Wayne, you can have 20 years experience, so we can have the first year's experience 20 times." There is a huge difference between those two, okay? The last 20 years, knowledge has changed. Access to knowledge has changed. The way people respond to knowledge has changed. Students have changed. Go back 20 years. There weren't cell phones. You didn't have people looking up things on Google under the desk or Instagramming or anything else. Okay, the whole range of things have changed. Students change. And I'm sort of generalizing here, we tend to value stability and an orderly progression in our careers. Millennials and so on, much more adept at rapid change, much more adept at dealing with ambivalence, also much more compassionate, according to the data. So there are also all sorts of value changes going on. The relationship between knowledge and society is changing. Okay, the former British Secretary of State for Education said that Britain is sick of the opinions of experts. If you go to the dentist, you want an expert dentist. You don't want someone who is trained in underwater basket weaving, okay? People like the idea of subjects like science and math and so on. They like the idea, but they also start to question them, okay? They question, can we trust these people? Are these people working in our best interest? Is it a large conspiracy? So the relationship between society and knowledge has changed. There are also challenges to knowledge bases. So for example, who has access to particular subjects or disciplines? Who has power? Who uses that power within those disciplines? What are disciplines used for? There are questions of inclusion, there are questions of exclusion, and they all come up in this idea of experience. The role of the instructor has also changed. You go back 20, 25 years ago, you were the sage on the stage, so like I am, okay? You impart knowledge, and your students are empty vessels who gladly get filled up and then walk out, okay? Doesn't work anymore. It never worked then either, but that's a different story. Now it's the guide on the side. How do you facilitate your students' learning? How do you help them to understand content? How do you help them understand how to apply that content into the wider world? So a question for you, and you don't have to answer now, although I know Monica's got a hand up already. How has your instruction changed over the last few years? Just have a think about that. So, discourse. Discourses shape our perceptions of reality. Now, discourses come in many shapes and forms. There are discipline-based discourses. There are discourses about teaching and learning. There are discourses at the institutional level. So, for example, the academic plan is an institutional discourse about where do we want to be in 2023. I think that's the next one. Yeah. Because the way we believe about these things, about our subject and about teaching and learning, do actually shape how we actually teach. To become an instructor is actually, there is a need for you to be engaged in the discourse. Okay? Hoping to change or hoping to change things is not enough. You actually need to be engaged with what is going on if you're going to drive any sort of meaningful change. And the third one, Foucault, I still don't understand a lot of what he's talking about, but I understand this bit. Education as a political system will keep reproducing itself unless the assumptions and the knowledge bases which underpin it are challenged. So discourses give us the opportunity to raise questions of power. They give us the opportunity to raise questions of inclusion and exclusion. But they also require us to be engaged in what we're doing. and emotions. Nope. So emotions help us look at the situation we're in and how do we interpret it, how do we respond to it. So if you have been successful, and all of us are here because we have been successful in our particular discipline, the evidence is fairly clear. Students who learn the same way that you learn are going to be more successful than the other students in your class, because you teach the way they learn. They pick up on that, they're good to go. The students who don't learn the way that you learn, they tend to struggle a bit more. How do you look at failure? I tried it once, it didn't work, I'm never going to try it again. If that was the way you approached everything, you'd actually get nothing done. And Vygotsky said that learning is social. Okay, you need to be engaged with other people. And so part of becoming an instructor is to build supportive environments in which risks can be taken. Now, someone came up with risk-taking on the board. Okay? So part of being or becoming an instructor is taking the risk to make the change. But remembering that emotions play into this as well. So 3 questions. And we're going to try a strategy now. What does good instruction in your discipline look like? How did you decide on this vision of good instruction? And what are the alternative visions for what good instruction would look like? So, turn around, find someone beside you, behind you, just around you, and one of you is going to be person A, the other person is going to be person B. Now, if you're left with 3, just go A, B, and C. So, a couple of seconds to sort yourselves out. Okay, that's enough time. Okay, so what we have, we now know who the benign dictators are. They're the ones who go, you're person B, I'm person A. They're down there. Okay, so this strategy is called a 3-minute interview. It's called a 3-minute interview. Okay, person A, when I tell you to, you are going to talk for 1 minute about these questions. Person B is going to keep quiet. Now, some people find that really difficult, okay? But you need to keep quiet. At the end of 1 minute, person B is going to take over. They're going to talk for 1 minute, okay? So it doesn't matter if you disagree or whatever. The 3rd minute, you can both talk, and what I want you to do is come up with a consensus, okay, as to what are some of the things you've decided. Now, this strategy is wonderful because when we go around, we're going to pick person A or person B, which means both people need to know the answer. One person cannot do all the work. By not knowing who's going to be called upon, you also keep everyone accountable. And the 3rd one is for all the shy people out there, all the introverts like me, if you have to answer on your own behalf, that's actually quite terrifying. If you get to answer on someone else's behalf as well, it actually reduces that fear a bit. So person A talks for 1 minute, person B goes for 1 minute. The 3rd minute, both A and B talk, and then we're going to get some answers. So person A, are you ready? Go. Okay, person B, take over. Swap. Okay, swap again. This is your 3rd minute. Okay, your time is up. So, and the instructor gets ignored. Maybe we need to practice some proximity next to the people who are talking. Gerald. Ulf. Ulf Runeson. Always know your students' names. It's a much more effective way of getting their attention. So, Ulf, who was person A in your group? Ah, excellent. An answer, please.
Well, since I'm an English prof, I'm interested largely in textual things like poems and plays, and for me, an instance of good instruction is to encourage the students to realize that the texts they're looking at aren't as transparent as they sometimes think they are. That there's mysteries and questions embedded in them, which is why they're returning to them to explore them in the first place. Since if they assume that a reading of the text will give them all they need to know about it, they're not really going to look at it again. And when I was talking to Ulf, I raised the example of Hamlet, when he's told by the ghost at the beginning that his uncle killed his dad so that he can nicely go out and seek revenge. Some students assume, oh well, that's an end on it. Then he just had to go out and do that. And of course, collects a bit of evidence. He's got his play within a play. He thinks it's evidence. It isn't. But many students think that it's evidence as well. They simply ignore the fact that instead of having a brother killing a brother, which is what happened in real life, he has a nephew killing an uncle, which means that his play within a play can be construed as a threat to Claudius, not as a thing eliciting his guilt. And if the students suddenly realize that, oh, it's not really evidence, they then sort of have to go back to the play and find out stuff that is.
Okay.
And get drawn into it. Stuff like that.
So, good instruction looks at using the text as a way of finding evidence to support ideas and then finding out what the deeper story is. Are there any alternative versions to...
Probably, but we didn't get that far.
Oh, okay. Karen. Wait on, who was now? You had 3 people in your group, so... Okay, so who was person B? Drini, tell us what you discussed.
We really discussed about, because we have a biologist, my background's law, Karen is everything. We were just looking at how many times for us, good instruction means that you can apply the concept. And so that, specifically in terms of like a law school exam, it's all scenario-based. It doesn't, if you have not been able to apply anything, that means you haven't learned it, so it's not really good instruction.
Okay, so it's, again, applying, and the evidence would come into that as well. Okay, are there any alternative visions to that? Or
I don't think we really got that. Or, I'm assuming you mean good alternatives.
unless we examine them, we don't know whether they're good or bad. Ponder that for a minute. Actually, save that thought because we're going to come back to it. Doug, who was person B? Okay, just go with Monica then.
We felt that it varied depending on what you were teaching, that it really, Doug pointed out that it could vary depending on the level of instruction, it could vary depending on grammar versus literature.
but explained why you couldn't answer the question in great detail. But it actually raises the point, it's no good just having one or two instructional strategies, because some won't work at 8:30 on a Monday morning, okay? They might work fine at 10:30, 8:30, forget it. So a number of instructional strategies, so it's an interesting point as well. So these are sorts of questions which if you're going to become an instructor, you need to ponder and need to consider. The last one was there because that one established the idea of uncertainty, which is where your thought comes in. Because uncertainty is actually quite important. If you're uncertain about a new strategy, if you're uncertain about how to go about changing teaching and learning, then fear not. Uncertainty actually is a double-edged sword. One, it can actually be a motivation to go and change. I'm not happy with how it's going, therefore I'm going to do X. The other danger is that if I'm uncertain about something, I'm not going to try something different, I'm going to stay with what I can do. I'm comfortable with it, I don't need to change it, I'm going to stay as I am. So uncertainty and action is involved, change is involved. And if you're trying to do this by yourself, it's actually quite difficult. And again, this came up this morning with the opening. It's no good trying to work by yourself, you actually need to work with people, and we'll come back to that in a later point. But we try different ideas and then we evaluate the quality of them. Because if you don't evaluate the quality of things, then what happens is you fall for fads. Okay? Who's here from the 70s and remembers flares, lava lamps, the Brady Bunch, the Fonz? If you wait long enough, they come back. That's awesome. The danger of fads is they breed cynicism. Okay? Oh, we tried this 30 years ago, it's just, this is the same idea just coming back, okay? The more things change, the more things stay the same, okay? So if you don't evaluate what you're doing, then you can fall into this trap. So the third part, so we're on the home stretch now. If we're going to be taking action, working by yourself doesn't work. I've done work with science teachers who started teaching in the 1960s. They worked by themselves to reform their practice. It took them to the mid-80s to actually identify as having changed. That's 20 years. The person he mentored took about 7 years to reach the same point. The person that the second teacher mentored took about 3 years to reach the same point. Okay? Working by yourself is extremely difficult. Don't go there. Okay? It's simply not worth it. Be realistic. You're not going to change everything at once. Is there a small part of your practice which you need to consider and you need to change? Go with that. Okay, you're never going to teach the perfect lesson. And when I go out and see my students teaching and they come and say, I just taught the perfect lesson, you think, oh, here we go. Because guaranteed they probably haven't. Work with like-minded colleagues across academia because a lot of the issues which people face in different faculties are actually the same, which is where the learning commons is going to be wonderful. Talk to people across the school, across the institution. Chairs and deans. Okay. Are there issues which you can raise with them? Can they support you in what you're trying to do? Are there a group of like-minded people who you can work with? And of course the teaching commons. There's no sound on this one. For those who have never visited the website, this is what it looks like. Scholarship on Teaching and Learning was mentioned this morning. SOTL. So, yep. Resources. Resources are not actually the issue. Okay? But if you look at this by yourself, it fairly quickly gets overwhelming. If you start working with it with other people, then it starts to make sense. So there's a whole range of different things in there. Oh, sorry, this one does have sound on it. I was wrong. Go back. No external agency, no other person can actually help you to become a better instructor. Okay? if you get people saying this is the way you should teach,
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
if someone says that to you, be careful. Because if someone is prescribing how you should teach, then it's often from a very utilitarian point of view. Okay, you know your discipline, you should know your students. Reforming your teaching practice to meet their needs, that's really your job. Okay, and that's where teaching commons and so on can come in practice into its own. If you have the moral obligation to teach your students to the best of your ability, then again, be very careful if other people say you should teach in this way. Once you do get started, then of course you have to be aware of inertia. University teaching has built up over several hundred years. There's often a traditional view on how things should be taught, how things shouldn't be taught. And to challenge those norms is actually quite difficult. These reasons come up all the time as to why we can't change. If I change my teaching strategies, it'll dumb everything else down. It requires more time and effort. Well, to start with, probably yes. But will it be a better result for your students? Will it compromise accreditation requirements? It's not going to be supported by my colleagues. Not possible in my large class. It's not possible in my classroom. It's going to compromise the proper sequencing of knowledge, and it's not going to prepare students for future study. I've used all of those excuses. There are ways to challenge them. Okay, sometimes they're more difficult to look at than others, but if you come across inertia, then just be warned. You know, how are you going to work with it? How are you going to go and change what needs to be changed? And finally, time. If you're going to change as an instructor, if you're going to become an instructor who is constantly improving, then that's going to take, at the start, 2 to 3 years. Okay, so we're not going to be changing anything overnight. When things go well, celebrate them. Okay, doesn't matter how small they are. Okay, you've made an improvement, that's tremendous. Give yourself permission to make mistakes. This comes back to the risk taking. If you can learn from other people's mistakes, that's even better, but make mistakes and learn from it. Engage your colleagues, mentors and students. Now, teacher evaluation forms. Getting students' evaluations at the end of the course is too late. Why? Because those students are now into the next course. You probably won't see them again. If you get feedback through the course, then you can adjust your teaching for them. Critical conversations, the root word of critical means to actually talk to someone in order to improve what they're doing. Okay, at the moment it has a pejorative term of, I'm just going to rip your class to shreds. Okay, it actually means to improve. Talk to people about teaching and learning. Invite people into your classrooms, see what you're doing. And finally, instruction is not for the faint-hearted. Again, this was mentioned this morning as well. So for several years, you could well be struggling with difficult issues, but again, don't struggle alone. And the final point is make sure that you know that your work does actually make a difference. Okay? So Samuel Johnson, the supreme end of education is expert discernment of all things, the power to tell the good from the bad, the genuine from the counterfeit, and to prefer the good and the genuine to the bad and the counterfeit. And that's it.
Thank you, Wayne. Much
Do we get
appreciated.
questions?
Do you want to take questions?
I don't know. Monica's doing something. Does anyone have any questions?
There you go.
You go as an instructor with all good intentions, and you discover that motivation for your students to learn is poor. What do you do?
You need to.
Do you want to try speaking in?
Yeah, my voice is going. Motivation for students is always a vexed question. One of the things you need to do is actually get to know your students, because if you know your students, then you can start to understand why that motivation isn't there. Is it the reputation of the course? That might be it. Is it what they've done beforehand? There's a whole range of issues which you would need to look at. But the first part would be to get feedback from your students. Why do we not find this interesting? And then go from there. So that's where the feedback from students actually becomes critical.
Well, I know students are in the center, they are critical.
Yep.
But if their level of understanding that is expected in a class is very low, but they come to the class anyway, they have to take certain courses to graduate, there is the one that is available. You are in a situation like that, that there is no shortage of carry.
Yep.
Prepare to change. Try to communicate. And you are actually dying for it to get access to the student's head. But then you cannot access there. Partly perhaps they are not prepared for it. They didn't come with enough background and a whole lot of other things.
Yep.
You are struggling as an instructor, right? So you are actually punishing yourself. You say that you are not alone as an instructor, but in some cases you are alone. And it's a very hard thing.
It is.
You are successful all along, and all of a sudden you can't seem to access them, right?
Yep.
And what do you do?
Sometimes you have to accept that you're not going to win every battle. Okay, so if you show your concern for this student or these students, if you go out of your way to help them, and they shouldn't be in that course, or they have no motivation, then at some point you've done everything you can do. At some point, especially at this level, it's back on them. I think Nancy was going to say something.
Well, mostly I just need to say that we're recording this so it can be streamed to our colleagues at Aurelia, and so when there's conversation in the audience, that doesn't get picked up, and so we're not able to share that with them. But I think that's a critical question that many of us have tried to deal with, and I think that that's a great example of how the Teaching Commons can provide us a space and maybe the opportunity with a focused conversation or coffee or whatever to continue that conversation. So fair enough? Okay, I think we're not going to have any more questions just because of that difficulty with our colleagues hearing it. But I would like to thank you again, Wayne.
And thank you for turning up.
It's a tough business. You have to work hard at it. All right, well, we're at the point where we're just going to have a few housekeeping details. Actually, it's more than housekeeping. I hope that all of you will stay to enjoy the reception that's being held in the Teaching Commons. And apparently it's under the balloons. So as long as you can see the balloons, you'll know where you're headed. Also, we would like you to stay to take advantage of this time to continue the conversation with Dr. Melville and with one another. I think Wayne gave us a chance to think about some important questions, and it was a little bit hard to get people to actually stop talking. So I think you've already got some conversation starters going there. We would also like to take group pictures of the Distinguished Instructor recipients that are here, and also, I was going to say the Contribution to Teaching Award folks, but I don't think we've been joined by any of them. So what I'd like you to do with respect to the picture, if you could just start by gathering up here at the front, and then Karen will direct you to where she wants you to go. I also want to acknowledge, before we get into the Teaching Commons for our more informal part of this event, I want to acknowledge that Kayla Falkenholt is providing us with musical entertainment on the harp, and so that's going to be very nice in the background. And I would like to close the formal part of our event by thanking Dr. Melville again for his significant contributions to teaching and learning at Lakehead. I would like to thank Dean John O'Mara for providing a wonderful introduction for our recipient. And I also want to acknowledge the work of the members of the 2016-17 Senate Teaching and Learning Committee for their careful consideration of the teaching dossiers of the nominees. It isn't an easy job, and they always rise to the occasion by taking a very thoughtful approach to this important decision. And with that, I'll end by thanking all of you for sharing in this celebration, and wish you a wonderful evening when you do leave here. Thanks again.